Hi, welcome to the 2018 CDBG and HOME General Construction Application webinar. This is through the City of Indianapolis Department of Metro Development. Just a reminder that after this webinar is completed, it will be recorded. And if you are unable to stay for the entire presentation, both the recording and the PowerPoint will be available for public view on DMD's YouTube channel and the HOME and CDBG Partner Resources page under Webinars and Training. And those links are below. They're a little bulky, but they should direct you there. Or sometimes our email signatures will have contacts as well. But if you have any issues, you can email us as well. All phones will be muted during the presentation. This is just to make it easy on everyone to kind of listen. But if you have a question, we encourage you to type the question into the messaging box, and we will address it at select points during the webinar as well. I'm Jeff Hasser. I'm the Community Development Block Grant Manager for the City of Indianapolis.
I'm Katie Band, the Home Investment Partnership Program Manager for the city.
And so we'll be switching on and off throughout this, so just so that you can kind of put a voice to the name. So the goal of this webinar is to provide clarification and direction relating to the 2018 CDBG and HOME General Construction applications that are due on July 20th, 2017. We'll probably be saying that date a lot. We want everyone to be fully aware July 20th, 2017 is the date to submit the applications at noon to DMD's offices. Any late submissions will, of course, not be accepted. So during this webinar, DMD staff will make recommendations for best practices of the applications, give some general ideas of things that we might see as hang-ups for typical applications, and try to get ahead of those before you actually start dealing with the application. What this webinar is not for, it's not for applicants to ask project-specific questions. So if you want to know a specific eligibility of your project, or how HOME might impact the regulations, or HOME regulations might impact a specific project, we're really not going to answer those on here. We ask you to reach out to us directly for those issues. Outside of the webinar, though, we are limited to providing technical assistance and general clarification regarding the application. We cannot provide project guidance and advice. And we'll touch on that a little bit later as well. Just to give you an idea of the allocation, we anticipate about $3 million for community development block grant this year, and an additional $1.4 million in home investment partnerships. Again, as a kind of a typical awards, we get a lot of requests of, is there a, can we apply for a grant for $50,000, or can we apply for a grant for, $3 million? In general, our typical award amounts are between that $200,000 and $750,000. That's not to say that a project or application can't submit for less or more than that. That's just what's typical for our project amounts. I would say that, it's pretty rare that we would give all of our allocation to one project, and it's also pretty rare that we would fund, smaller projects, something like $5,000 through this. So there is kind of a minimum threshold that I would say becomes whether it is worth it to invest our funds, whether it would really make the project more difficult as opposed to help it. And then Home Investment Partnerships Program is around that $200,000 to $500,000. For home eligible activities, home projects are limited to the development of home ownership and rental housing for low-income households, 80% of the area median income or below. Upon initial lease-up, all home rental units must be leased to households at 60% AMI or below, and 20% of the home rental units must be low home units and leased to households at 50% AMI or below. So these are some things just to keep in mind as you're kind of developing your applications to be aware of in terms of the requirements. For CDBG, our funds can be directed to a wide range of projects, including but not limited to multifamily rental housing, single-family homes, business expansion, demolition of blighted structures, and construction of public facilities. If you do have a question of whether your project would be eligible, I recommend that you reach out to me as soon as possible so that we can kind of discuss the project and give a little bit more clarity to it. The project must benefit the low to moderate income individuals or areas. In general, the other parts are our owner-occupied repair program and our public service applications will not be accepted in this round. If you're not familiar with those, don't have to worry. You know, it's just something to be aware of that we have other sources for those specific types. Additional information related to the program and eligible uses can also be found on HUD's website, located at that website below. If you are trying to decide between completing the HOME or CDBG application for a housing project, and I want to reiterate, these are almost exclusively for housing projects. For example, HOME can't do an economic development or something like a park, etc. So something to keep in mind. So for those housing projects, we generally recommend that applicants complete the HOME application. Now, that isn't to say, the reason for that is because it is more focused on housing, and a question is included if the applicant would consider the CDBG as well. So the difference in the funding tools would not impact the projects. The CDBG application includes additional questions that do not apply to housing. So it's just to make it a little easier on you from an application standpoint. If there's a specific reason that you would lean towards community development block grant, but over HOME, you can definitely reach out to us. We just don't want you to have to deal with additional pages of information that isn't required when a HOME application will do exactly the same. DMD staff can provide assistance to determine eligibility of a project and costs for either HOME or CDBG. And although a project may be eligible, it still may not be the type of project that the city is directing funding towards. So please review the priorities listed in the application just to kind of be aware of those too. All potential non-housing CDBG applicants will be required to submit a project eligibility determination to the CDBG manager by July 6, 2017. This is something new with the CDBG application that we are requiring. So I'm going to reiterate that there will be a program eligibility determination that needs to be sent to me, and it can be a digital copy, and it can be an email, to the CDBG manager by July 6, 2017. So the project sponsor will be required to submit the section 1 of the application for the CDBG application to the CDBG manager for review. So you don't need to submit the entire application. You don't need to submit any of the attachments. All I'll be looking for is that section 1 of the document of the application submitted to me. And that gives me a general idea of what the project is, and I can give a little bit more clarity on eligibility. I will then issue a determination letter outlining the eligibility of that project. All applications must have this determination letter in order to submit an application on July 20th, 2017. And I do want to add a clarification there. That is, all non-housing applications must have this determination letter in order to submit an application on July 20th, 2017. So in general, as an organization, you're probably either submitting a HOME application or you're submitting a CDBG application, and you need this determination letter. If you have any questions about this or whether you would need it or not, you are welcome to reach out to myself, and I can discuss it more with you. Some of the eligible applicants for both CDBG and HOME include community development corporations, real estate developers, LLC. Both nonprofits and for-profits are eligible. We do occasionally get asked whether, there's whether for-profits would be eligible, and they have been recipient of funds in the past. Again, 15% of the HOME, 15% of the HOME funding reserved for community housing development organizations, or CHODOs. And these are nonprofit organizations that meet certain HUD requirements. If your organization is interested in becoming a CHODO, you can reach out to Katie Bannon to learn more about that information. and what requirements are applied. However, the idea of being able to qualify as a CHOTA within the next month is probably not likely, but if you're interested in it for future years, it'd still be something that would be good to reach out to Katie for. Organizations without CDBG or HOME grant experience are strongly encouraged to have an experienced partner or a consultant. It is extremely rare that we would fund an organization without this type of partner. And I think we really want to reiterate, and I think we do reiterate it later in this presentation as well, is it just doesn't happen very often. If you as an organization are, a strong organization, good mission, good project, have experience with grants, it's still going to be a big hurdle if you don't have CDBG and HOME experience. Even if you're experienced with federal grants, CDBG and HOME are very unique and very different from other even federal grants and what their requirements are. We do have information available, but it's something that we're going to look at each of these teams to determine whether they have the experience, a partner or a consultant. Some of the ineligible projects for CDBG are schools, private or public, libraries, museums, and theaters. Exceptions may be granted in rare circumstances, such as historic preservation as well. These are some of the questions that we typically get. Would the city be supportive of blank? This is a common question asked by applicants. The city and D&D is generally supportive of many types of development. However, support does not always equate to funding for a variety of reasons. Other questions we typically receive but cannot provide answers to, would this project be competitive? Should we apply for this, or is it not worth it? Or should we do this or that in our application? Each organization, each project is different. It's going to be an internal decision on that. Katie and I will never say, don't apply for this fund. We might, give you, heads up to some of the difficulties that your project might incorporate, and we hope to cover most of them in here, but it's something to keep in mind as well. One thing that we do say to before you start completing an application is DMD does reserve the right to restrict the release of funds until all of the additional project sources have been secured. This is actually required by HUD regulations for home funds. One example might be, let's say you have a $1 million project and you're coming in for $500,000 for CDBG, and the other $500,000 is going to be fundraised. We might look at that fundraising and say, you anticipate doing it by, middle of next year. We would look and confirm that there is that ability. If you're not able to reach that fundraising or get that additional grant or whatever that may be to fill that additional gap, we reserve the right to return that conditional award to the city and reallocate it to another project as a result. All funds are paid out on a reimbursement basis and will not be eligible for payment prior to incurring costs. The organization must be able to support the costs incurred via their budget or a construction loan. So even if your organization has cash that they can pay for it up front and they anticipate being repaid from the city, we still ask that you mark that in your application as well. Another reminder is that projects may trigger Davis-Bacon union wages. We ask that you please contact Dina Batts-Davenports of DMD for information relating to Davis-Bacon and your potential project. We also have a webinar relating to it as well that is available for view that can give you an idea of what those requirements are and when it potentially applies. And then another reminder is that projects will not be able to begin until early 2018, and funding may not become available until the summer of 2018, depending on when the city receives an allocation from HUD. Another important reminder, so if you have a project that is starting in 2 months, that is not going to be eligible to apply for this. It's going to have to begin, or all work would have to stop until 2018. This is building into that. No acquisition or work can begin on the project site, even if using non-federal funds, until DMD has completed an internal environmental review process. This is not a phase 1 or phase 2. This is separate from this. I'll repeat that. Our own internal environmental review process that we do outside of a phase 1 or phase 2 needs to be completed before any work can be done. And this can take up to 3 months to complete as well. That's why we generally stick by that, anticipate no work or project being completed or starting, excuse me, until the beginning of 2018. And final architectural plans for a project may be subject to review by a city staff review team as well. All home-assisted home buyer units must be sold within 9 months of construction completion or revert to a home rental unit as well. And all home-assisted projects must be completed within 4 years, or all home funds must be repaid by the recipient. In addition, all home-assisted units are required to be brought up to current code standards, whether new construction or rehabilitation. And then, in addition, all home-assisted units are subject to an affordability period as well, which is clarified in the home policies and procedures. And then rental units are required to be periodically inspected and monitored by the city for long-term compliance with home regulations. Just touching a little bit on the application and file organization. If you do not organize files according to instructions in the application, it generally reflects poorly on the ability to carry out a grant. If we don't think you can organize, a few PDFs together, we start to question your ability to organize, a $500,000 grant from the city. Taken into account is also in the program evaluation for funding as well. It is just something that I think is pretty commonplace in a lot of these reviews teams, is that poorly organized systems, are generally a kind of an early red flag for most reviewers. We do ask that separate digital files be used and searchable PDFs for documents. The one exception to that is the Excel file for the budget and finance supplement. Touching on the separate digital files, all of those should be able to relate to the application. The application can be submitted as one document, even if it's broken up to different sections. Don't take section 1 as one document, digital file, section 2 as a different digital file, etc. Keep the application as one digital file. And then we ask that they're named as specified and in the electronic file folder with the specified name as well. So this is just a little example of one section folder from previous year. Subfolders are not required beyond this. I forget which section this relates to, but it included the plans and the site plan. And you can kind of see there was just 4 documents required. They were given kind of a simple explanation based on what was given the guidance, we gave the guidance to in the application, and broken down that way. So now I'm going to pass it over to Katie Bannon to go over some of the common issues or questions with the application.
Okay, so you're already here, so you're already taking the first step here, which is that we strongly recommend you watch or review the CDBG and HOME construction process webinar that we're doing right now today. We have a YouTube channel, as Jeff mentioned earlier, and we also will be posting that PowerPoint to our partner resources on our web pages. If you have other members of the development team, we'd recommend that they watch it as well, especially if you're maybe hiring a consultant or something like that. Even if they're experienced with CDBG and HOME, may be a good idea for them to watch it as well.
And I do want to provide clarity. So that's actually that's actually a separate webinar as opposed to this one. So this deals more with overall construction, etc. This is something that Katie and I worked on and released earlier this year, giving a high-level overview. It is really intense. It is separate from this, but it is also on our YouTube site. So you can watch, if you're watching this, and then you can hop right over to that on our YouTube channel.
Okay, so I'll take out the word general out of this PowerPoint to make that a little bit clearer, but it's our construction process. So we really went through last year and provide a lot more detail about the city's procurement policies and how to work that with the environmental review process, some other HUD requirements. So it's definitely a good idea to review that. And in some cases, it may make sense to competitively procure a GC or other team member after the award, in other cases before the award. We really recommend you look at that and think about who should be on your development team up front versus later, because it does change how you have to procure a member of your development team. As far as the audit, organizations are required to submit their most recent audit. So we know you may not have your 2017 audit yet, so you just submit your 2016. If you don't have an audit right now for your organization, maybe your newer organization, definitely contact the CDBG or HOME program manager, and we can talk you through that. A market study is something that was added more recently by HUD, I think in 2013, and it's a requirement for applying for these funds. It's important that the market analysis or market study determined your ability to sell or lease a property within the HUD deadline. So 9 months for sale of a home buyer property or 18 months to lease up a rental property. We're going to want to see comparables, lease rates, etc. from whatever market you're looking at. Really just must be clear that the market is there to sell the house at the purchase price you've estimated in your budget and finance supplement. We want to see that that matches. We're also seeing that your rental units can lease up.
Hey, Katie, before we go to that next slide, for the market study, do they need to hire a company to do this? I mean, do they need to hire someone who does market studies for a living in order to complete this?
You know, I can't remember honestly how it's written in the application. Typically it is a third party because it's rare that we can get the information you need otherwise. So I don't know that I've ever seen one that someone's done internally that's been sufficient for this. Visitability, this is a new requirement for our general construction round this year. Just applies to new construction single family houses. So visitability is defined as projects have to have one zero-step entrance, so you don't have to have all entrances, just one. All doors inside, and I guess outside would be wider, 32 inches wide. You also should have a bathroom on the main floor. Economic development projects only, this is, oh, that's how we decide if it's eligible. Job creation, so this is a part of the CDBG application. So for $35,000 in CDBG funding, we'd want to see one full-time job created. 50,000 is level within the NRSA, the Neighborhood Revitalization Strategy area. You must list the jobs to be created in your application. There's also a job reporting webinar on the CDBG website where it lists additional job requirements that would be a part of it. And there's a boilerplate letter that can be used for the letters of job commitments from businesses. We really do recommend that you look at that boilerplate to make sure that the letters include all the information we need. For economic development projects involving business expansion or creation, you should contact the Indiana Small Business Development Center or the Business Ownership Initiative as soon as possible. So we're looking to see, actually I can't remember what that's for, Jeff.
So this is what happens when we switch off and talk about each other's stuff. But so essentially what we're looking for there is that as a business that is emerging, that they are kind of following best practices, they're working with job coaching, et cetera. And then those organizations, that kind of gives us an indicator that, you know, this organization is trying everything, or business is trying everything they can to do to kind of improve, get better, look at additional resources, bring in coaching, et cetera. So it's a strong indicator for a business that's ready to expand and doing everything necessary to be as successful as possible. And then we give a heads up that those organizations may take multiple weeks to respond with a letter and may require additional information as well.
For funding commitments, it's strongly encouraged that organizations use the boilerplate letter, or again, use the same language from that boilerplate letter. So both the project and applicant should be named in those letters, as well as the funding amount and any restrictions of that funding. Projects with all their funding commitments in place will be given strong consideration over projects still waiting on additional commitments. This is very important. It's something relatively new with HOME. 2013, we can't provide any home funding until all funding commitment is in place. So you may think whatever funding source is a slam dunk, but we've seen projects stalled for years on funding commitment letters and are going to have to put a hard deadline on there if we do fund a project that doesn't have all their funding commitment in place. If you don't have it in place by a certain time, the award of home funding would be rescinded. So this is extremely important. For economic development, commercial and industrial projects, applicants need to reach out to a CDFI, or I don't know who the loan fund is, another kind of loan fund. Again, this is a CDBG thing. So you need to reach out to those organizations to see if they can fund the project. CDBG shouldn't be the first source necessarily to go to. We're really looking for projects that CDFI is not a good choice for the particular project.
In addition to that, the loan fund generally refers to the development fund through the state of Indiana through IHCDA. As far as I know at the time of this recording, they are not issuing any loans through that at this point. So that's kind of why it was up there. I did want to leave it up there, but just as a general heads up in case parties are interested in applying for the development fund, that I do believe it is not available, nor will be available by July 20th.
So there's a list of potential lenders that's available on the application, though it's not an exhaustive list. Just because we want you to reach out to them does not mean you need to use them as a lender. You may already have a favorable relationship with some other lender, and that would, of course, be fine as well.
And I'll explain, oh, go to the next one. I'll explain this a little bit. So if you do have this is kind of a flow chart to show how a project might work. If you have the potential project and you go to a CDFI, there's essentially 3 ways that they're going to say. They're either going to say the project can be completely funded without CDBG, and that kind of gives us a question of, well, why do you need to be able to show? You need to be able to show why CDBG should be utilized instead of private financing. We know everyone would rather have a grant than a loan, but at the same time, if your project can sustain a loan where others need a grant, we're going to be more inclined to approve the grant, the part that needs the grant, in order to meet that. So, but we still want you to do your due diligence. Most of our projects is the project can be funded but has a gap, and then CDBG can be proposed as that gap financing. And then the last part is the project cannot be funded. And this might show why the traditional financing doesn't work for this project and why you need a grant for the entire ask amount. But we still want you to go through those steps, because whatever the CDFI determines, that's going to give us an indication and give us, let us know what additional questions we need to ask and what additional questions to answer as an applicant.
So I think Jeff already mentioned this a little bit, but projects are not required to request funds as a loan for CDBG, but applications for CDBG that do project some repayments of a loan would be given additional preference. We really do like to see that if you can take on a loan, you do take on a loan. So if a project proposes a loan and is funded, the terms proposed in the application may be subject to a negotiation post that award announcement. So looking at site control in our application, it really demonstrates readiness. I think we have some information next about the environmental review process that HUD requires with site control. But if you've already acquired a site previously, that's okay. Just once it's, I think, 30 days prior to application, we don't want you to go ahead and acquire now. But if you do have a site, it demonstrates that you're ready. Hopefully you can start construction quickly. Looking at if there are multiple sites, we want to see multiple proofs of site control. The award is based on the addresses included in the application, so changes to addresses after the application should be minimal. It would need prior approval from the city. So we know things can change. Maybe you thought you're going to acquire a property and something happened, or something became available you didn't think was going to be at the time of application. We're open to that. We just definitely want you to talk it through with us, especially with HOME, since those addresses have to be on the contract, and HUD tracks by address for HOME. We'd want to make sure any changes go through all the process that that they need to go through.
That said, if you propose a project 1 year and then it's a year later and you come back and say, well, the site didn't really work out and we want to do another one, and you gave us kind of no updates throughout that time, we're going to be less inclined to say, this really becomes a different project. There were no updates. The site as we knew it was always the same, etc. The more you can keep us in the know and updated, the more likely we are to be amicable to any kind of changes.
Yeah, it's definitely something the review team looks at, as location is part of their consideration, and you'll see there are parts of the application, again, that also address the location that you're planning to do a project, so that stresses the importance of that. As we mentioned before, we have that construction process webinar that goes a little bit more detail about site control and how that works with environmental review. Here's the chart about when you can actually take on acquisition of a property that's part of a home or CDBG project or application. So I'm like, I guess we're less than 30 days out at this point from the application due date. So you cannot acquire a site at this time. So if you acquired something last year that you've decided now you're going to apply for CDBG or home funding, that's okay. But at this point, you shouldn't be acquiring anything until after the environmental review is complete from the city. This is something that happens after a project is awarded. This is really not something we have a lot of leeway on because it's a HUD requirement. So what is allowable is you could do an option contractor agreement or a conditional contract during this time, and that is allowable throughout. Phase 1 or Phase 2 is just a little bit of a change from last year. So we are not requiring Phase 1s at application for single-family houses that are within historically single-family residential areas. We know that was something that came off last round, and we heard you that most of the time it doesn't really make a lot of sense. We checked with our brownfield staff. We were able to issue waivers on all of those. So we may require that information at a later date if when we check with brownfield staff, they say, nope, there's something here that we do want to look at more closely. We want to make sure they have a Phase 1 and that everything's okay. We could require it, but up front we're not going to require it. However, for all other projects that don't meet that first bullet point there, we would want to see a Phase 1 environmental assessment submitted with the application unless you receive a prior approval. So definitely talk with us if you think you have a site, doesn't meet the first bullet point there, but you think that there's some specific reason it shouldn't be required to Phase 1. This has really come up because we have had sites that when we haven't had a Phase 1 up front, we have found out there's pretty serious environmental issues on a site. It's taken a lot of time to remediate. Maybe the initial project wasn't able to go forward as proposed, so it's very important. And then if you have a Phase 1 that recommends a Phase 2, we really expect to see that Phase 2 has already happened, so you have a clear understanding of what contamination may be required at the site and what kind of remediation may be necessary, if anything. So for our location priorities maps, we really want these to be in color and easily readable. So the question is, can someone who isn't assisting with the application still understand what the map communicates? We're okay with an overlay just over Google Maps, again, if it's easily readable and in color. So if you're printing something out in black and white and putting a permanent marker on there and then scanning it, we're probably not going to be able to read it. A couple other things, and again, this is why Google Maps is good, because it already has north-up, already has a scale, but if you use GIS or some other program like that, that would be fine as well. We want to see that half-mile radius shown of what's within that half-mile radius for those location priorities. For the neighborhood plan, quality of life plans are eligible, even though they've not been adopted by the city. So we really want to see a plan that has had a lot of public input, that's really neighborhood-led. If there's no neighborhood plan, just note that in the application, and maybe it's an opportunity for a future plan for that particular area of the city. For letters of partnership, we really want these letters to be about a concrete benefit that's provided by this partnership, not just general support of the application. So a good example would be maybe there's a neighborhood community center that's saying, hey, we're going to also provide financial literacy training specifically to these new home buyers. We have a joint partnership with the applicant for this project. A poor example of a letter of partnership would just be that a city councilor has submitted a letter saying they support the project. We think that's great. We hope all the city councilors support your project. However, we don't want the city councilor to spend that time on something where there really isn't that specific concrete benefit to this project. So we don't want you to kind of waste your time on developing a long list of partners that have low or no commitment. We'd rather see fewer partners that have a stronger overall commitment to the project and the households that are being assisted as part of the project. The budget and finance supplement, this is really a key part of the application. When you're asking for money, we want to know all about how you're spending it, what other sources there are, everything else. So we really cannot fund projects that haven't fully completed the supplement. We use it to perform our underwriting and subsidy analysis, which is something HUD requires of us. Basically, you're going to fill in those yellow cells and all others will auto-populate. But definitely let us know if anything isn't working as it should. We try to test this as much as we can with multiple staff members, but there still may be things that come up, or maybe you don't know where to put a particular item that is part of your project. We can help you through that. And the sooner you tell us that a cell isn't working, the sooner we can fix it and get that fixed out to everyone. The budget and finance supplement for homeowners is really similar to the format used last year. It's going to provide us with an analysis of both the appraisal gap, so the difference between development costs and how much the property can actually sell for. And then we also have an analysis of buyer affordability, making sure that a low-income household can afford the house or property with an affordable payment. Leveraging other sources provides a larger impact, so we'd love to see that. And then for home, again, all other sources must be committed before we can commit home funding. The rental budget and finance supplement is really pretty similar to the Indiana Housing Community Development Authority's pro forma. You've used that before for maybe a low-income housing tax credit project. A change, I guess this is from last year probably actually, but for rental, HUD is requiring in most cases that you use HUD's model to determine the utility allowance. There are a few exceptions for this that are going to be pretty rare for a project that isn't a low-income housing tax credit project. The model is pretty straightforward to use. You will need to find out some information from local utilities about what rates would be used for your particular project, but feel free to reach out if you have any questions about it. It's a spreadsheet, and I believe the link is in the budget and finance supplement. Again, if you leverage other funds, we see a larger impact of our funding, which we like, and all other sources for home must be committed before we can provide home funding. The commercial industrial budget and finance supplement should be completed for projects proposing to redevelop or create commercial and industrial space, which would be leased by potential organizations. Organizations should clearly list their proposed rent, comparable developments, again looking at that market study of what other developments in the area are charging, potential and committed tenants, and show long-term cash flow for the project. The economic development supplement should be completed by projects proposing business creation or expansion. Organizations should clearly list the ability of the organization to produce long-term viability of the business and their ability to create the proposed jobs. The general supplement should be completed by projects without a housing, economic, or business component. So these would really be limited to public facilities or non-revenue generating projects. Organizations will need to show their ability to maintain maintenance costs of the project outside of additional federal funds.
So I will reiterate this as well. What we saw a lot of this is, you know, sometimes we'd see economic development projects or even housing ones fill out the general one because it's easier, and that's just completing the wrong supplement, and your application wouldn't be eligible. The other part about that as well is I'm going to use the example of a park, not that we funded one anytime recently, but a lot of people would think like, oh, you know, the city can just fund the park. There are no, you know, costs associated with it. It's a park. It's going to be grass, etc. There's always maintenance costs associated with that, and those always have to be taken into account. If you list nothing as the maintenance costs for some of these projects, my most likely assumption is that you as an organization did not take those into account and have not considered those. And in addition to that, CDBG or city funds are not always going to be considered as an automatic use. So if you are developing a park and you say, oh, $10,000 a year to maintain that park, it would not be applying to the city for CDBG to maintain that park, nor would you make the assumption that Parks is automatically going to accept that and take care of that with their additional budget. So those are things to make sure that you are aware of and that you keep in mind if you are using the general supplement.
So we're going to take questions today. We may also get some questions by email or phone. Definitely reach out to us. We plan to compile all those and have an email link to the FAQs to our email list on July 6th if we receive questions. We'll also post them on the CDBG web pages, and we'll continually update those. Really, as Jeff mentioned, limited at this point to answering more technical questions about eligibility in the application. If you're not currently on our email list, let us know and we can sign you up for our email announcements. Also, I know Jeff's signature, I'm going to add it to mine, has a link to how you can sign up for those email announcements. Really the best way to get up to date on everything going on in CDBG and HOME. Again, our submission deadline is July 20th, 2017 by noon. You bring it to the Department of Metropolitan Development. We're on the 20th floor of the City County building. That's 200 East Washington Street, Suite 2042. And the applications can definitely be submitted early, so we highly recommend it. Reminder, you have to go through security here, so that takes some time. So rather than getting here at 12:05 and wasting all that time, show up the day before or at 9 a.m. We don't accept late applications. Both the paper and digital copy should be submitted by the deadline. So the digital copy would just be on a USB drive. And I already mentioned the security here. Looking ahead to our timeline, applications are due July 20th. In August, we'd email any clarification questions that the review team has to the applicant contact that's listed on the application. And then we expect to announce awards with the annual action plan in October. All right, so we'll go to questions here. And I did see a few pop up. This one.
Mm-hmm. Click on it again. Sorry for that. And then, sorry, we're trying to get to those and make sure that we can kind of see everything that we need to. So one of the first questions would be, is a domestic violence shelter considered more of a public service? No, public service is as it relates to, essentially as it relates to like youth programming or job training programs. So that doesn't have to do with this. These projects for CDBG in particular are more associated to construction or development of real estate primarily.
Is there a matching requirement is the next question. There is technically a matching requirement for home for the city. However, because the city has had so much matching funding in the past, we're able to use past matched funds to meet that requirement. However, we are tracking the matching requirement. It's something HUD looks favorably on. I mentioned leveraging. So it's not required that there's a minimum, but it is something we're tracking and taking into account with applications and whether we fund them or not.
The next question is the market study required for all projects, i.e. non-housing? So it'll depend. Obviously, like a thing like a park, for example, wouldn't need a market study. Generally in business development, we would like to see something that shows there is a market. And that might be for the business, that there is a market for this to expand and provide its goods or services within this area. For example, maybe a laundromat needs to be built there, and we can say, okay, well, we have documentation. We can show documents that show that there aren't laundromats around here and that there might be a need for that. In addition, we've also seen, for example, last year we had a kind of commercial development that was proposed that we funded, and they were able to kind of show that the commercial rents were kind of unaffordable in that area, and that by creating this, they could create more affordable commercial rents that would be in high demand. So that was kind of a unique way, and it kind of depends on the project, and we're happy to kind of list what we would like to see, but you can reach out to us. And then what are the rates in terms of the CDBG loans? That's actually one of the best parts about that is we leave it up to the organization to propose. What I generally say is that a 0% interest loan, not paid until stabilization or deferred for the first 2 years, is an okay term to project or to propose. What we do say is we don't want it longer than 5 years. At that point, any project should be stabilized, and I think we would like to be bought out at that point. And then in addition to that, we would like to see it, respectable. So if you have a project that is, proposing to throw off $100,000 in profits a year, and this is going to be kind of the only debt on the property, and you're saying you need 0%, I think we would be more inclined to say, well, that seems like it might need a little bit higher.
And then our next question here is, if an option was secured prior to the 30-day limit and the acquisition closes within or after the 30-day limit, is this allowable? And unfortunately, that is really not allowable. It's a HUD thing that we don't have flexibility on. So we would recommend, if you are planning to try to apply for CDBG or home for that particular property this year, that you try to extend that option if at all possible, or wait until next year, because there's really just no way around it, unfortunately.
Yeah, and we kind of apologize for any confusion on that. That is something that was within our construction process webinar that we know some organizations had difficulties with in the past, but it is not a city policy. It is a federal policy that's required.
Do we have any other questions today?
And you can kind of type them in there, or if you wish to reach out to us afterwards, we're kind of happy to talk to you on an individual basis as well. And then the question as well as applied to the option for the acquisition is, does this apply if non-CDBG funds are used to fund the acquisition? Yes, it still applies. It would still be ineligible. So whether
federal or non-federal.
Yeah, so exactly. So even if the organization is using their own money to acquire the building, within that 30-day window, it still would not be eligible, because what HUD determines is that the site is being disturbed at the time there is an intention to apply for CDBG or home.
Yeah, or not even necessarily disturbed, but yeah. Okay, well, thank you everyone for attending today, and as we said, feel free to follow up if you have additional questions as you start looking in more depth at the application.
Thank you.